My father mocked me for driving trucks. 28 out of 30 raised their hands to exile me. Grandpa said nothing, until he rewrote the will on the spot. Hello everyone. My name is Nolan. I am 32 years old. I reside in a house in the Chicago suburbs with my wife Ivy and our daughter Hazel. We currently manage a modest trucking firm with a fleet of 10 trucks. From the outside, people perceive our lives as successful, as if we have worked things out. But, to be honest, this property and the business we own now are not the result of my efforts alone. I was a long-haul truck driver, earning roughly $4,000 each month after taxes. My wife Ivy worked as a sales assistant for a fashion brand, but her income was inconsistent and insufficient to support us. Life was rough. We were renting a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less-than-safe neighborhood of Chicago, and the rent alone ate up about half of my monthly paycheck. We'd tally every dollar at the end of each month to ensure we had enough money to care for Hazel. I remember traveling 14 hours a day from Chicago to Texas and back to make a few $100s in overtime. I'd get home at 2 or 3 a.m., exhausted and ready to collapse into bed. But I had to get up again by 6 a.m. to prepare for the next journey. Meanwhile, Ivy worked at a fashion store with a modest base wage and was paid primarily through sales commissions. When business was slow, she earned only $1,800 per month. So we frequently had to borrow money. Even for Hazel's 5th birthday, we could only throw a little party at home with a few grocery store cupcakes and some inexpensive gifts. Seeing her smile so brilliantly at such small things both warmed and hurt my heart. Everything began to alter after Christmas in 2023. Strangely enough, the life I have today is largely due to my parents and family and how they look down on me. I wouldn't be where I am today if not for their judgment. To help you comprehend what I went through, I'll take you back to the day I received a phone call from my grandfather, 1 week before Christmas. That day, I was returning to Chicago after 3 days of moving furniture for a firm. When I saw Grandpa on my screen, I quickly responded via Bluetooth. His soothing voice filled the interior of my truck, and for a little moment, I felt less alone on that long length of roadway. After asking how I was doing and how work had been, he remarked in that kind tone, "Nolan, next Sunday is Christmas. Bring Ivy and Hazel over for dinner, 7 o'clock. I miss Hazel so much." Hearing his caring voice brought me solace after all those grueling days on the road. I promised him we would be there and hung up the phone. My grandfather Everett was 78 years old that year, yet he was as smart as ever. He enjoyed hosting a family meal at his home every few years to bring everyone together. He has 4 boys. My father Victor was the oldest, followed by 3 uncles: Warren, Edgar and Silas. Uncle Warren was a show-off. He worked as a branch manager for an insurance business and never missed an opportunity to talk about the million-dollar contracts he had just secured. Every time he saw me, he asked me a cocky question. "Still driving trucks, Nolan? When are you going to get a real job?" Then there was Uncle Edgar. Quieter, but his eyes were constantly filled with disdain. He managed a tiny restaurant and had a habit of looking people up and down and shaking his head, as if he could judge someone's worth based just on their clothing. But my father, Victor, was the worst of them all. Being the oldest, he felt himself as protecting the family name and behaved as if he had the authority to condemn everyone else. He managed a tiny construction company and enjoyed bragging about his achievements, even though they were all modest jobs. The hardest part was that he was ashamed of me. Every time someone inquired about me, he'd reply, "Let's not talk about him. His truck driving embarrasses me." Then he'd give me this hurt look, as if I'd brought dishonor to the entire family. He even shouted it directly to my face once. "You driving a truck? You're an embarrassment. I can't show my face to my friends." When asked what I did for a job at family gatherings, he either avoided the issue or changed the subject to brag about Trent, his golden child. Uncle Silas was the only one who treated me with decency. He was a grade school teacher with a low salary who always appreciated others. He once said to me, "Your job doesn't define you. You're supporting your family with your 2 hands, and that's something to be proud of." Uncle Silas was the only one of Grandpa's sons who I actually liked. I didn't like Warren, Edgar, or especially my father. To be honest, I despised them. But I chose to attend the Christmas dinner because Grandpa had asked. I had no idea that accepting that offer would drastically change my life. That evening after supper, I informed Ivy and Hazel that we would be spending Christmas at Grandpa Everett's home. Hazel, who was just 6 at the time, wrapped her arms around me excitedly asking, "So, I'm finally going to meet Great-Grandpa Everett, right, Daddy?" Seeing her joy, I smiled and replied, "That's right. He said he misses you a lot." Hazel dashed over to Ivy holding her tightly and screaming, "Mommy, I'm going to draw a beautiful picture to give him. Watching her seem so enthusiastic, I hoped she had a memorable Christmas that year. Ivy stared at me with concern in her eyes as Hazel dashed off to her room to begin drawing. She approached, leaned in, and murmured gently, "Are you sure we should go?" I understood exactly what she meant. Every time we went to one of those family dinners, I'd come home heavy, withdrawn, and mute for days. After a few seconds, I sat down on the couch and said, "I honestly don't know, but it's Grandpa's invitation. We can't say no." Ivy sat next to me, softly grasped my hand and said, "You know, I'm not afraid of what they'll say about us. I'm just concerned about Hazel." Her words struck me hard. I had also considered that. After over a minute of silence, I eventually told her, "Maybe we should just stay for a little while. Wish Grandpa a Merry Christmas, then leave early." Ivy nodded silently. She didn't say another word. Over the next 3 days, I was torn. Part of me longed to visit Grandpa, the one person in my family who had ever shown me pure love. But another part of me dreaded being in the same room as my father and uncles, dealing with their criticism, especially in front of my wife and daughter. The day before the party, I saw Hazel place her sketch into a small gift bag while continuously asking about her great-grandfather. That was when I made up my mind. We were heading to a party. Whatever occurred, I would defend my daughter and ensure that no one hurt her with their remarks. We drove from Chicago to Rockford around 4 p.m. on Christmas Day. In our old automobile, we drove for over 2 hours. Throughout the voyage, Hazel kept raving about the drawing she'd done with Ivy's aid. She was quite excited. "Daddy, I drew Great-Grandpa smiling. And there's a Christmas tree too." Just before turning onto the familiar road to Grandpa's house, we made a quick detour at the bakery to get some apple pie, his favorite. We arrived around 6 o'clock. Many automobiles were parked in front, including my parents' Accord and my younger brother Trent's shiny new Civic. I imagined they came early to brag about their accomplishments before I arrived. After finding a parking spot toward the end of the block, we walked to the house. The gate was not closed because it was Christmas and the party was in full throttle, so we walked straight in. Trent and I ran into each other just as we arrived at the front entrance. He was standing nearby, a beer in hand. He looked me over and said sarcastically, "Well, look who decided to show up. Isn't that my big brother? The truck driver." His remark stung, but I did not say anything. I just continued walking. Ivy gripped my hand fiercely and Hazel trailed behind us, oblivious. When we entered the living room, I was surprised by how many people were present. Nearly 28 people were talking and laughing loudly. In addition to my parents, I saw the families of Uncle Warren, Uncle Edgar, and Uncle Silas, who were all present. There were also some extended relatives, such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde, as well as a few unknown faces, which I imagined were their children, or grandchildren. It had been a long time since I had seen most of them. When I stepped in, Uncle Silas greeted me with genuine sincerity. "Nolan, you're late. Traffic?" I said politely, "Yes, Uncle. The roads were a little busy today." He offered me a warm smile and said, "Go ahead and find a seat for your family. Grandpa will be out any minute." Uncle Silas's act of goodwill moved me deeply. He was not my father, yet he always made me feel more loved than my biological father ever did. Honestly, there were times when I wished my father could be half as nice as Uncle Silas, but I knew that would never happen. As I searched for a seat for us, I could feel the gaze on us. Some folks nodded and smiled graciously, but I could tell that others glanced at us with thinly veiled scorn. What I didn't realize then was that my family will be asked to leave the celebration in just a few minutes. As Ivy, Hazel, and I were seeking for a spot to sit, a sharp voice pierced through the background noise, paralyzing the room. It was my father, Victor. He stood up from a brown leather chair, looked at me with a chilly, deadpan expression, and stated, "In this house, seats are for people who've made something of themselves." My heart skips a beat. My face flushed, heated, and blood rushed upwards. But I forced myself to remain cool, asking, "What do you mean by that, Dad?" Trent moved in from behind, his voice full of hatred. "It means losers like you don't belong here." It felt like someone slapped me in the face. Right in front of everyone. I looked over at Ivy, who was hugging Hazel tightly. Her face had turned pale from astonishment. Then came sluggish, mocking claps from the left side of the room. Uncle Warren was seated on the sofa with a smug expression. After a few mocking claps, he remarked with a disdainful voice, "Trent is correct. This room is full of achievers. Are you still planning on driving trucks for the rest of your life?" Before I could react, Uncle Edgar leaped in. His words cut like a dagger. "Honestly, we're all a little embarrassed whenever someone asks what you do." My own family insulted me repeatedly. I felt my cool slipping. It felt like being in the center of a hostile circle, surrounded by people who considered me as nothing more than an ugly. I looked down and noticed Hazel trembling and grasping Ivy's leg. Her large, innocent eyes were perplexed. She could not understand why everyone was so rude to her father. Just as I was going to speak up and defend myself, Uncle Silas stood up from his seat in the corner of the room. He looked around at everyone, his eyes keen and hard, and stated loudly and clearly, "That's enough. It's Christmas. For God's sake." His voice sliced through the tension like a razor. For a little moment I felt a sense of comfort, like if someone had reached out a hand to me when I was drowning. But the storm was not over. I could feel it. The silence that followed was deep and almost stifling. The entire room felt like a wire pulled too tight, about to snap. After Uncle Silas spoke, everyone exchanged nervous glances in the silence. Slow, steady footfalls sounded from the corridor. Grandpa stepped out, his demeanor serious but with the customary serenity he was known for. He searched the room before raising his voice. "Silas. That's enough. They're right." His comment struck me like a bomb in my skull. I could not believe what I'd just heard. Grandpa, the only person I still trusted in this family, agreed with them, siding with the people who had recently insulted me. Several seconds elapsed. He then turned to face me, his eyes filled with what appeared to be sympathy. There was also something else in there. Something I couldn't fully understand. He returned his gaze to the rest of the room and stated, "We'll take a vote. If you want Nolan out of this party, raise your hand." The room plunged into a dreadful quiet. Some folks looked about, puzzled or unsure. Others looked nearly ecstatic about the suggestion. Uncle Silas stepped up, his face flushed with fury, and asked, "Are you serious, Dad?" Grandpa stared him straight in the eyes and stated, "I'm not joking." That moment seemed like the world was crashing around me. The air in the room became heavy and everyone appeared to hold their breath, waiting for the unfathomable vote to begin. A few seconds went by. My father, Victor, raised a hard hand. He locked eyes with me as he did, his countenance icy and unwavering, as if he had just won a long-awaited battle. Trent was next. He lifted his hand with a malicious sneer. He appeared to be enjoying himself, as if he had been looking forward to this moment for years. Then followed Uncle Edgar and Uncle Warren, who raised their hands virtually simultaneously. Warren nodded, apparently delighted with himself, while Edgar maintained a serious attitude, as if he were carrying out some noble task. Their relatives followed. Dolores, Warren's wife, hesitated, but after looking at her husband, she raised her hand as well. Edgar's adolescent children, perhaps 16 or 17, followed his lead hesitantly and awkwardly. But they nevertheless went along with it. I turned to see Ivy embracing Hazel closely. Her eyes were crimson and filled with tears that had not yet fallen. Hazel, completely oblivious of what was going on, looked up at her mother and murmured, "Mommy, why is everyone raising their hands? Should I raise mine too?" Ivy gripped her closer, attempting to keep the tears from falling down her cheeks. I glanced around and noticed a few reluctant hands. It was distant relatives, such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde. They glanced at each other, then at me, divided between decency and peer pressure. Aunt Miriam stared at her husband and then at Uncle Warren, her face filled with uncertainty. Uncle Clyde chewed his lip, his palm resting on his thigh as if he were about to vote, but he still hesitated. Then Grandpa screamed, his voice booming, "Come on, I don't have all day." The pressure burst through the final amount of resistance. Those uncertain hands rose rapidly, almost as if they had been told to. I quickly counted in my brain. 30 out of 32 people raised their hands. Only Uncle Silas and his wife Aunt Lillian remained still. Silas had had enough. His face was glowing red with wrath, and his fists were clenched at his sides. He grabbed Lillian's hand and raced towards the door. As he passed Grandpa, he paused, looked him straight in the eyes and whispered quietly, "I'm honestly ashamed of you." These words hovered in the air like a sentence being delivered. I had never heard Silas speak to Grandpa in that way before. Not once in my life. He then approached me, put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's go, Nolan. These people don't deserve to be called family." I was stunned. I'd never seen Uncle Silas like this before. The nice man who usually tried to keep the peace was now standing up with a fire I had never seen before. I didn't want Ivy and Hazel to have to go through this again, so I took their hands and followed Silas out of the room. As we passed Grandpa, my heart was filled with resentment. He invited me here solely to humiliate me in front of my wife and children. I kept thinking, Why would you give me hope to crush it like that? Behind me, I could hear a few people snickering, like if they had just seen the end of some bizarre little play. Hazel was still clutching her sketch, not understanding why we had to leave so quickly. As I looked at the uplifted hands that voted me out of that room, I realized I no longer had a grandfather, father, or family. As we approached the front door, a booming voice broke out behind us. "Stop right there." We all froze automatically as Grandpa shouted. Despite his rage, Uncle Silas stopped in his tracks as he heard something in his voice that was forceful and irrefutable. Several seconds elapsed. The silence was so heavy that I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Then Grandpa spoke again, louder and with clear authority. "The ones who are leaving tonight are not you." Uncle Silas and I turned back to look at him, perplexed. I had no idea what he was going to do, but there was a weird fire in his eyes that I had never seen before. He turned to face the remaining seated people, the same ones who had just raised their hands to vote me out, and remarked coldly, "The people who need to leave are the ones with their hands in the air." The room exploded. Protesters raised their voices. Shouting came from all directions. My father sprang to his feet and said, "You've got to be kidding me. You can't do this." Uncle Warren and Uncle Edgar joined in, their voices frightened and loud. Warren, visibly shaken, remarked, "Are you serious, Dad?" Edgar took a step forward, attempting to play peacemaker. His tone became soft, almost false. "Dad, I just wanted to teach Nolan a little lesson, that's all. I didn't mean any harm." Distant relatives, such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde, began looking for explanations. Aunt Miriam, her voice quivering, added, "Uncle Everett, I only went along with the others. I didn't want to upset anyone. I wasn't trying to insult Nolan. I swear." Uncle Clyde nodded immediately in accord. "Yeah, that's right, sir. We just thought it was some family joke. We didn't realize how serious this was." But Grandpa shook his head slowly. His expression did not relax, not even slightly. He glanced directly at my father, then at Warren and Edgar, his eyes filled with profound disappointment. "Since you were kids, I taught you that family is about love and loyalty, and now you are mocking Nolan because he's a truck driver." My father was still attempting to salvage the moment, wanting to change the story. He stepped forward, furious in his tone. "I don't look down on him, but he needs to take responsibility. He's 32 and still driving trucks. I was trying to motivate him to do better." Grandpa's look became icy cold. He stared straight at my father and said, "Victor, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" My father's cheeks turned red. He responded firmly, "Why should I be?" Grandpa hesitated for a bit. Then, with a heavy heart, he glanced around the room and added, "Because 12 years ago, when you went bankrupt, Nolan, only 18, gave up college and became a truck driver. He didn't want to be a burden on you. And what did you do? Even while you were broke, you poured every last cent into Trent." Those words struck like a bomb. The entire room became silent. Everyone looked at my father. Trent stood beside him, his face drained of color, recognizing the truth had been revealed. The atmosphere became suffocating. I stood there in stunned silence, overcome by a torrent of bitter recollections from 12 years earlier. Ivy clasped my hand strongly. Hazel still had no idea what was going on, clutching the drawing she had drawn for her great-grandfather. Grandpa's comments transported me back to when I was 18, the year everything changed. That was the year our family declared bankruptcy when my father's construction company fell into major financial difficulties. He owed about $300,000, which seemed like a lot to us at the time. I made the difficult decision because I wanted to help my parents. Despite having received a scholarship, I decided to drop out of college. Instead of going to school, I obtained a commercial driver's license and began working as a long-haul trucker. For the next 2 years, I worked tirelessly. I paid Trent's high school tuition and the majority of the family's living expenses. Every month, I gave my whole wage to my mother, keeping barely enough to cover my basic requirements. Then, in 2015, Grandpa gifted my dad $400,000, allowing him to finally pay off his debt and restore his business. I genuinely believed things would improve from there. But rather than appreciating me for giving up my youth to support the family, my parents and Trent began to look down on me. Why? Dad's business partners disliked the idea of his kid driving a truck. They said it harmed the company's reputation. After a heated dispute at Christmas dinner in 2016, in which Dad flatly stated that he was humiliated to have a son who drove trucks, I cut off all contact. From that moment forward, I never returned home. When Ivy and I got married, we kept it simple, with only a few close friends. When Hazel was born, I did not inform anyone in the family. I experienced the most significant periods of my life alone. In all those years away from the family, I only communicated with two people, Grandpa and Uncle Silas. They were the only people who really understood and supported me. Both of them had attempted to persuade my parents to reunite, but they refused. Their condition was clear. To be allowed back, I needed to change occupations. But I'd made up my mind too. I wasn't going back unless they sincerely apologized. Because it wasn't only about me anymore, it was about Ivy and Hazel. And I would not let anyone treat them like I had been treated. So, standing there, hearing Grandpa voice those facts aloud, speaking of the sacrifices I made, it felt like someone had finally seen it for the first time after years. Someone finally knew what I'd been through, and it meant more to me than I could ever express. Back at the celebration, after Grandpa reminded everyone of what had happened in the past, my father refused to confess his mistake. Instead, he doubled down, looking upset, and defiantly told Grandpa, "I raised him. It's only fair that he pays me back. That is a child's obligation." Grandpa's face got angry when he heard such comments. At that point, he was no longer holding back. He shook his head in terrible disappointment, then glanced around the room with hatred in his eyes and said, "I had planned to split my savings among you today, but I have changed my mind. You do not deserve a cent." When Grandpa discussed his funds, the attitude in the room changed again. Panic spreads like wildfire. Voices rose at once. Yelling, protests, and bewilderment. My father rose to his feet saying, "What are you talking about? That is our inheritance." Trent moved forward, his voice trembling. "Grandpa, you cannot do this. This is not fair." Grandpa lifted his hand sharply, gesturing for silence. "Enough," he said, his voice low and steady. Then with calm authority, he announced, "The $4 million will be divided between Silas and Nolan." Uncle Warren exploded before he could finish his sentence. "What? $4 million?" Grandpa nodded and spoke evenly. "Yes. I sold half of the farm 2 months ago. I would have divided the money equally between my 4 sons and 6 grandchildren. That would have cost $400,000 each. But, after what I witnessed today, none of you deserve it." That's when the true panic struck. My father sank to his knees in front of Grandpa and clutched his hands fiercely. "Dad, I apologize, I was mistaken. Please give me one more chance." Uncles Edgar and Warren stepped in, presenting their causes. "Dad, we were only encouraging Nolan to do better, we did not intend to disrespect him." Trent, now sobbing, ran up to me and grabbed my arm. "I'm so sorry, Nolan, I was mistaken. Please forgive me." Unfortunately, it was too late. Grandpa glanced at them with a stone-cold, undisturbed, and absolute expression. Nothing could make him change his mind. I stood there startled, as if I were living a $1,000,000 dream. A number I had never dared to consider. Grandpa raised his voice authoritatively as they continued to refuse to go. "Get the heck out of my home. Now." My father yelled out in wrath, "You can't do this. We will take you to court." Uncle Warren joined in, his tone stern and intimidating. "You are elderly, Dad. We can prove that you are not mentally able to manage your assets." Trent yelled out in frustration, "I will not let this happen." But Grandpa just gave a dry, sarcastic chuckle. The kind of chuckle that knocked them down cold. Then, in a calm and almost pleased tone, he stated, "You are fools. Did you forget I still had half the farm? I'll transfer the deed to Silas and Nolan in 2 days." His comments struck them like a bucket of frigid water. They quickly understood they had not simply lost $4 million. The remaining half of the land was easily worth another $3 million. And now that would also be out of reach. They fell silent, knowing they'd run out of options. They fled one by one, furious, dejected, and bitter. Just before walking out the door, my father turned around, looked me dead in the eye with disdain, and said coldly, "Are you happy now, Nolan? You have broken this family apart." I did not respond. I simply drew Ivy and Hazel in close and held them firmly. Following their departure, the house fell into a peculiar, serene silence. Only 6 people remained in our family. Uncle Silas and Grandpa surveyed the untouched food still scattered across the dinner table. Grandpa turned to us and said, "Let's save only enough for the 6 of us. The others helped me box it up. We will take it to the destitute." This was not leftover food. It had just been delivered by a high-end restaurant earlier that afternoon. Nobody had touched it. The supper was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m., but by 6:30 Grandpa had already sent everyone else home. We all hurried swiftly to assist him pack the food and load it into Uncle Silas's pickup. There were enough roasted chickens, bread, salads, desserts and soda bottles to serve hundreds. Hazel eagerly joined in as we packed, looking up at me with curiosity. "Daddy, who are we giving the food to?" I said, gently brushing her hair back and smiling. "To people who need it, sweetie. Hungry people don't have a home to return to." The six of us then got into 2 cars and proceeded to Rockford's downtown district, where we knew there were many homeless individuals. It was a location I recalled from years ago, filled with people simply struggling to survive. When we arrived, Hazel glanced about with big eyes at the men and ladies sitting on the sidewalks in worn-out clothes. She gripped my hand tightly and whimpered, "Daddy, why don't they have a house?" I knelt alongside her, looked into her eyes and spoke quietly. "There are lots of reasons, sweetheart, but what matters is that we can help them." Ivy and Aunt Lillian began serving the lunches, while Grandpa and Uncle Silas engaged in private chats with several of the attendees. Hazel was shy at first, but she quickly began to offer boxes of cookies with her tiny hands full of kindness. The smiles, warm thank yous, and most notably, the sight of calm thankfulness in one elderly man's eyes as he received his dinner, told us everything we needed to know. We were doing the correct thing. After we finished the last meal, Hazel came up to me and placed her arms around my waist. She said, "Daddy, I'm thrilled." Everyone smiled so nicely when they got their food. And that's when it struck me. This was the most memorable Christmas my family had ever celebrated. Around 8 o'clock, we returned to Grandpa's house and sat down to eat together. There were just 6 of us at the table, but the warmth and excitement made it feel more full than ever. As everyone gathered, Hazel reached into her small purse and took out the drawing she had been keeping. She stepped over and presented it to Grandpa, smiling proudly. He picked it up to check it thoroughly before smiling warmly and said, "This is beautiful. I'll hang it on the living room wall so everyone can see it." Hazel clapped her hands enthusiastically in response to his compliment. "I drew you with a big smile, great-grandpa," she added brightly. A little later, Ivy brought out the apple pie we had purchased earlier, and we all shared dessert. After supper, Grandpa recommended we move into the living room and converse for a little. He returned to his office, holding 2 $2 million checks. When he handed me one, my hands trembled so violently that I was worried I'd drop it. Uncle Silas was equally as surprised, his hands shaking and his eyes wide with incredulity. We both looked to Grandpa, overwhelmed by gratitude. I could barely get the words out. "Thank you, Grandpa. I don't even know how to express how grateful I am." Grandpa nodded and continued, his tone calm yet serious. "In a few days, I'm transferring ownership of the remaining part of the farm to the 2 of you." We glanced at him shocked. The remaining acreage was worth several millions more. Grandpa let out a deep sigh and added, "I don't trust the others anymore. You 2 are the only ones who deserve to carry on what I've built." Hearing it, my heart sank slightly. Not because of the money, but because of everything we had sacrificed as a family to be here. I stared at Grandpa, my voice shaking. "Grandpa, I know this must have hurt you deeply, having to decide." Uncle Silas agreed and added, "Dad, I never wanted it to come to this either." Grandpa laid a hand on my shoulder and stated gently but firmly, "Nolan, I've watched them for years, and today was just the final straw. I know who has a good heart and who I can trust." Hearing those remarks, I buried my head, overwhelmed by emotion. I felt grateful for his faith, but also felt the weight of the duty he had placed in my hands. That night in Grandpa's guest bedroom, I lay close to Ivy and Hazel. My mind is entangled in a web of emotions. On the one hand, I felt a profound sense of relief and thankfulness for finally being noticed and supported in ways I never imagined. However, I couldn't shake the underlying despair. The sad reality that our family had utterly fallen apart. Once Hazel had fallen asleep, Ivy turned to me and said, "I still can't believe this is real." I softly gripped her hand and said back, "Me neither. But we must use this money wisely. It cannot change who we are." After a brief silence, we reached an agreement. No boasting. There will be no showing off. We would utilize this gift to create something better, more lasting for our small family. The next morning, as Ivy and I returned to our Chicago apartment, we were met with an unpleasant surprise in the lobby outside the elevator, along with my parents and Trent. Faces tensed. Posture is firm with determination. They came over as soon as they saw me and demanded that I divide the $2 million I had received into 4 equal portions. They said it was only fair. I didn't see any cause to argue. With a cold, hard tone, I looked them straight in the eyes and stated, "If you think you have a case, take it to court, but I'm not giving you a penny." My father lost his cool when he heard that. He started ranting, calling me ungrateful, greedy, and selfish. He hurled every possible abuse. His statements were cutting and malicious, intended to wound. But I was not going to stand there and accept it. Without another word, I turned around, grabbed Ivy and Hazel's hands, and headed right into the elevator. A building security guard intervened barely in time to prevent them from pursuing us. That same afternoon, Ivy and I reached a clear conclusion. We updated our telephone numbers. We only gave the new ones to Grandpa and Uncle Silas, the two individuals we still wanted in our lives. It was a difficult decision, but we knew it was the only way to save our peace. We couldn't let selfish, nasty people continue to disrupt the life we were attempting to create. After receiving the money, I did not waste it right away. Instead, I determined that my first investment should be in myself. I utilized the first $10,000 to enroll in a Chicago Community College's business and asset management program. I spent 3 months learning the essentials of accounting, human resource management, marketing, and business planning. Most nights, after finishing my trucking shifts, I stayed up late studying, determined to get the abilities I knew I needed. When the course completed, I began taking the first steps toward fulfilling a long-held dream of creating my own trucking firm. The first order of business was to locate a warehouse and a small office space. I went to dozens of places before choosing a small warehouse on the outskirts of town that provided a reasonable rental fee. On the first day, there were no banners or extravagant celebrations. Grandpa, Uncle Silas, and their families joined me for a simple ribbon cutting in front of the warehouse. That was more than enough. When Grandpa smiled proudly beside me, I knew I was on the right track. This was not simply the start of a business. It demonstrated that I could stand on my own 2 feet and create something worthwhile with Grandpa's trust in me. The early challenges were real. Getting permits, securing truck insurance, and finding dependable drivers kept me awake at night. There were times when I almost gave up, such as when a key client dropped out because they thought my company was too tiny and inexperienced. However, each setback taught us a valuable lesson. When I lost a client, I realized I needed to improve my presentation skills. When a driver unexpectedly quit, I learned how to form a backup crew. Every obstacle became an opportunity for growth. Throughout this voyage, Grandpa and Uncle Silas served as my personal advisory board. With his years of business knowledge, Grandpa would frequently call to guide me through client discussions. Uncle Silas assisted me in reviewing contracts and provided advice on prudent financial management. Thanks to their encouragement and supervision, I gradually gained confidence and experience. And gradually, I started expanding the business. It's been a year and a half since that Christmas party, which changed my life forever. My company has developed beyond what I could have expected. We now have 10 long-haul trucks and a team of 20 dedicated personnel. With the consistent revenue from the business, we moved out of that tiny apartment and into a cozy 2-story home in Naperville, a suburb of Chicago. It includes a large backyard where Hazel can run free, a quiet office for me to work in, and a roomy living room with a fireplace, which is our favorite location to hang out on weekends. Hazel is 7 and in 2nd grade. She's excelling in school, and I couldn't be happier. Ivy has left her sales career to focus on our family and assist me with the company's accounting. My friendship with Grandpa and Uncle Silas has gotten much stronger. Every weekend we drive to Rockford to see Grandpa. He's 80 now, as sharp as ever and always ready with sound business advice. He proudly displays the drawing Hazel gave him on his wall, as if it were a masterpiece. Meanwhile, Uncle Silas has taken on the role of unofficial financial advisor. He assists me in reviewing significant contracts and developing plans for future expansion. I had not seen or heard from my parents since that day. I assumed I never would. But I was mistaken. They unexpectedly showed up at my front door yesterday. Pale, worn out, and desperate. I'm not sure how they acquired my address. This time there were no insults or shouting, only pleading. They asked for $400,000 to save their home. My father had made another poor financial decision by participating in a questionable real estate transaction. He had mortgaged the house and was now unable to pay it back. I wasn't moved by their lovely remarks and sobbing apologies. Instead, I offered them a simple condition. I responded, "If you can tell me my birthday, I'll help." 5 minutes of agonizing quiet ensued. They glanced at each other and attempted to recollect, but were unable to. My father stated he assumed it was in October. Trent guessed the 15th. Nobody noticed that my birthday is December 23rd. They lived with me for 18 years and none of them knew. I saw the disappointment on their faces. I said nothing more. I closed the door calmly. There is no anger. Just indifferent. Later I told Grandpa the entire thing on the phone. His pleasant voice came through. Good job, Nolan. I am proud of you. And so, what are your thoughts on this story? Was it right or wrong for me to turn them away? I would love to hear your thoughts. If this tale resonated with you, please subscribe and join me on the next leg of this adventure. Thank you for being here.